Hello, in this video, I'm going to go a little bit further into forming the team and team composition. So far, we have talked about team size, and in the kind of base lecture on teams and team design part 2, the kind of intro to team design and composition, I talked about a variety of things that we want to think about when we put together a team. But this video is going to go into a little more detail about a few more elements of the characteristics of team members. So specifically, we're in this question of who is on the team and who should be on the team. And there's a variety of different ways to think about characteristics of people, but we like to split these up between what we think about as surface characteristics and deeper characteristics. And surface characteristics are what we typically think of as these demographics, so gender, race, ethnicity, age, things that are readily apparent, maybe even things like functional background or education, which certainly reflect deeper level qualities about training and knowledge, but people tend to understand pretty immediately, are you an engineer? Are you a salesperson? And we might make these corresponding judgments about what a person is like and what knowledge they have based on those background characteristics. So surface are the more classic demographic differences. Deeper are going to come into play with the actual knowledge, human capital, experience, skills, etc. that people have to bring to the problem of the team. And then we also put in there personality and values as deeper level qualities. I'll talk a little bit about personality and values, just a little bit of research touch to kind of represent some things we know about how personality might affect teams, and then a little bit about what you might think about doing about these things as you both consider forming a team and also when you're in a team to think about, where could the source of kind of both the positive qualities of teamwork and maybe challenges you're facing be coming from in terms of diagnostics. So one thing to think about when we think about these sort of knowledge, skills, and abilities that team members have, alongside of what I discussed in the base lecture of collaboration readiness and familiarity and prior shared experience as things that we know can help teams work better together. If members have those qualities, teams have higher performance, greater effectiveness. Similarly, there's some just general knowledge, skills, and abilities that support effective teamwork. So if we can either choose people who have these KSAs or help think about training people as they work in teams to improve these KSAs, we will get more effective teamwork. So conflict resolution, and again, next week we'll get into conflict as a process that's really essential to teamwork. And people who are very good at kind of effectively engaging in discourse and resolving conflict can certainly benefit teams and support collaboration. Effective communication skills and even sort of meta communication, understanding what to look for in terms of team communication. Again, we'll come back to specifically the behaviors of communication next week in terms of what is effective in teams. People who just naturally are good at setting goals, setting targets, communicating goals, and engaging in performance management activities like project management activities are also going to be better team members. And people who are just good at planning and task coordination, which I'll come into in a little more detail here. So, the following skills are important for any team member. First and foremost, we need the right functional knowledge, the right expertise in place. So if we need to solve a technical problem, but we don't have any technical experts, it's going to be pretty difficult to do that. If we need to develop pedagogy for online instruction, if people don't have any training or background in that, the team might be able to figure that out over time, but it's certainly going to take longer than if you brought in a team of instructional design experts to that team. So first and foremost, we have to go back to what's the purpose of the team, what's its goals and deliverables, and then think about what kind of skills and knowledge and expertise is required there and find those people. Now, having said that, we did talk about effectiveness being at least partially gauged by individual growth opportunities. So sometimes you may choose to put a person in a team who doesn't presently have the knowledge or expertise they need, but you want them to develop it. So it may be appropriate to put some members in who can be learning, and the team is a growth opportunity. But of course, that wouldn't make sense to have the team staffed almost entirely that way unless you had plenty of opportunity for that team to engage in a learning orientation, which we'll come to in another short lecture about goals and what kind of goals are appropriate for teams. So if a team has time to do trial and error and experiment and fail while learning, then it might be acceptable to put people who don't quite yet have the skills they need. So again, thinking about these trade-offs about who you need in the team and when. But in addition to that, we want to think about these ideas of general task management skills, which are kind of similar to those KSAs I just discussed. And overall, people with better interpersonal skills are going to be better team members. Again, not terribly surprising. This exhibit here is from the textbook in Chapter 2, and I just recommend that you review this because these, again, are things that we could think about if we can identify people who are effective at these or hold these kinds of skills. You know, people are just better at coordinating. People who are good at gathering suggestions and getting people to participate are going to be better team members. At the same time, we can think about this as leaders when we work with people in development plans or in our own personal development to look at this set of skills. If team-based work is an essential part of your work in your career or in your organization, then making sure that there's opportunities for people to have training and executive education and other skill development to do these kinds of task management skills is going to be really important. Likewise, people who just are naturally more effective at some of these interpersonal activities, I would align with the idea of collaboration readiness, and those are the kinds of people who are going to be more effective at working interdependently in teams. So when we think about the skills and talent in a team, I think that there's some very interesting trade-offs to think about, and you can ask yourself, should you always be seeking the highest performer or so-called stars for your team? Would you prefer a team of stars versus a team of decent performers, let's just say, adequate performers? And there's some very interesting research about this. And on the Canvas site, I posted an article, I'm just looking at it, called The Surprising Problem of Too Much Talent. It's kind of a practitioner interpretation of some of the research about this question. And I encourage you to read that article if you can find the time to do it. It's a optional reading, but it's very interesting. But basically, you know, people sometimes believe, or managers believe, that talent always helps performance. But in team settings, I wouldn't say too much talent overall, but sometimes star performers can create problems for teams. And there is something called the too much talent effect. And it actually varies depending upon interdependence. So if you think back to the foundational lecture on Team Design Part 3, Intro to Structure, I talk about interdependence, the different kinds: sequential, pooled, and reciprocal. So when teams are highly interdependent, it turns out that having the presence of some stars can actually be particularly challenging. So there was a research study done in 2014 that looked at athletic teams, and basically they found that when you had really like a team of stars, that performance actually suffered when those teams played in highly interdependent sports. So stars actually cause problems in sports like football and basketball, where people have to interact a lot more to create plays than they do, for example, in baseball, which is a lower level of interdependence. And I have the picture here of a Sports Illustrated cover of The Miracle on Ice. And this, for some of you, are quite young now, but you maybe know the story of The Miracle on Ice, which was in the 1980 Olympics. The United States Olympic hockey team managed to defeat the Soviet Union in the semifinal round and go on to beat Finland for the gold medal. And it was unprecedented because the U.S. at the time strictly adhered to the rule that Olympians needed to be amateurs. And our teams were always fielded by college players who were not in the NHL and many times weren't really even destined for the NHL. And they were underpowered in terms of their talent overall. But in the movie, Herb Brooks, who was the Gopher coach, assembled a team. He became the Olympic coach, and he made a very specific and conscious effort and actually didn't place some of the top talent superstars on the team that he had available because he really emphasized and focused a team that would, in fact, really collaborate. And hockey is a highly interdependent sport. And the Disney movie is a great movie. If you're looking for something to stream, we just rewatched it again because it was just the 40th anniversary of the Olympic Games in Lake Placid. And as a tiny aside, my younger daughter is on the U.S. Olympic development team for luge, and she trains in Lake Placid. So I've been there a lot lately, and I was there right around the anniversary time in February. So it's just sort of an exciting kind of remembrance of this, but it's a very interesting story that before this research, the study I just told you about was published in 2014. Herb Brooks really understood this, and he put a team together that did the unthinkable, and in part he did it by avoiding having one or two superstars that might have disrupted the opportunity to really gel as a cohesive team. And my own colleague, Beth Campbell, in my department here, has done work on the role of stars in organizations and the challenges of stars. And on a flip side, what her research shows is that oftentimes if there's really a star performer in a team, when the team is more interdependent and when more collaboration is required, oftentimes those people face a certain amount of undermining or undercutting in the team. And again, we can think about challenges about this. This may in fact be true, especially if we are still sticking with independent individual rewards. So we'll come back to that. But you can see how these decisions are interconnected. The structure of the team will affect the benefit of having stars present. The structure and the presence of stars together are going to matter more or less depending upon the kind of reward structure we have. So there's many different things that will contribute to team effectiveness, which is why it's a very complex kind of thing to think about managing. But one of our key roles as leaders is to figure out, what do we do now and how do we think about setting things up? So when we think about composing the team, we want to think about these general skills that are really effective. And we want to think about the pros and cons of recruiting and staffing teams with stars, which in some conditions when work is less interdependent, requires less overall collaboration, may be very effective. Okay, so let's go on a little bit to some of these more of these deeper level sources of characteristics. So talent, expertise, knowledge is also deep level characteristics, but so is team personality. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on personality here simply because most of us don't have a lot of opportunity when we're staffing teams to actually access personality information. And I would caution you a little bit in terms of just making armchair judgments of people's personality from observing their behavior. You can certainly make some generalization about people's extroversion and introversion, for example, and maybe even this idea of openness to experience. But these studies are using the so-called Big Five personality inventory, and extroversion, introversion is one dimension, openness is another, emotional stability is another. But it is interesting to see that the average levels of personality in a team on these dimensions does seem to have an effect on performance under conditions of things like conflict. So for instance, openness means people just generally are a little bit more flexible, a little bit more curious, a little bit more willing to kind of consider things that they aren't used to or haven't seen before. And what we see in this research, which was on undergraduate business students, so take that for what it is. We found that when teams had a lot of conflict, in fact, they could turn that into good performance if people were open. So it makes some sense that if you're open, if you're experiencing conflict, you can kind of think about how to get through that, think about what it might mean, think about how to process that, and actually leverage that discourse to some higher performance. Importantly, if teams were constructed of low levels of openness, conflict really harmed their performance. And a very similar pattern happened with emotional stability. Again, this makes sense, and we'll come back to this next week when we talk about the connection between task conflict and emotional or relationship conflict. And I think it makes sense here that, people who have relatively low emotional stability might turn conflict into something more personalized. And we see that showing up here, that if there's teams with higher average levels of emotional stability, if they experience conflict, they actually can turn that into some benefit for the team and have higher performance. So this study looked at the effect of average levels of certain team personality characteristics and team creativity. And here we see that if we have people who have high extroversion, the teams are at high average extroversion, if they have high confidence, they have more creativity. If they have low confidence, they have less creativity. So this is an interesting thing to think about. Again, it means that, okay, if you have a team and if you sense that you have quite a few extroverts on that team, you need as a leader to think about how to bolster their confidence, how to get them to believe that they have the capability to perform well. And if you can do that, you can leverage that extroversion into higher creativity, for example. This was a similar pattern on openness, that when teams had high openness over here, if they were confident, their creativity was higher. So again, it looks like you can leverage the personality of the team members by encouraging them and getting them to understand that they have the capability. So it's something in the book, textbook, you'll see talked about as group potency or group efficacy. These are sort of the beliefs the group has. And leaders play a big role in developing this. And some of this is also developed over time if teams can have small accomplishments and small wins to start gaining confidence in what they're doing. This will sort of feed into this process and improve overall performance, and in this case, improve creativity. So the takeaway here is, I think if you have the capability to understand personality, and some organizations do have personality testing and have that available to HR personnel, possibly available to you as unit leaders, you probably want to design teams with people who are generally more open to experience and higher emotional stability. I'd take a little caution on extroversion. I would recommend reading some books like Quiet. There's some books about introverts and the benefit of introverts. What might need to happen is that you have introverts in your team, and you have to design the structure of communication so that you get participation from introverts and don't let the extroverts dominate communication, etc. Another thing you can do, again with some clear caveats, is you could sit down and do a little bit of a grid and think about each of your team members and try to do a basic thought process of whether you categorize them as more or less open, more or less emotionally stable, more or less extroverted or introverted, and then think about the implications here in terms of personality effects. The textbook talks a little bit about this as well, but again, I think there's a lot of other things we can be doing beyond personality, and frankly, things like trying to elevate group efficacy, team potency, belief in confidence in people's capability will work no matter what. It's not going to necessarily harm performance if you emphasize this, even if you don't necessarily, for example, have a lot of extroverts in your team. Okay, so if we think about summarizing personality and team performance, one way that people look at this, again, as I've been mentioning, is the average level. So this is to say, if we could build teams of more people who are conscientious, more people who are agreeable, more people who are open, more people who are emotionally stable, these are meta-analytical correlations. So again, these are across multiple studies and quite strong, robust effects. And what we see here is, I guess my interpretation is, all things equal, building teams with members who have high conscientiousness, high agreeableness, high emotional stability, and high openness to experience will improve performance. To the extent that you have access to that information and can put together teams of people with these sort of deep level qualities, you should get better team performance. However, it's also important to look over here that the minimum level matters. So to some degree, the lowest level of person matters. So if you think about what is the highest level of conscientiousness that the lowest person has, that has a powerful effect on performance, as does low level of agreeableness. So you don't want people who are really low. You don't even want one single person who has extremely low conscientiousness. This would be that person who does not have those team skills, who does not have those task skills. A low conscientious person is not proactive. They are not planning. They are not engaging and participating. They're not thinking about those task management skills. So having even one very low level person is detrimental to performance. So again, thinking about building a team, trying to avoid certain low levels in personality will also support the performance effectiveness of the team. And then finally, diversity matters. And in particular, these are negative correlations in the parentheses. And the largest of these negative was diversity and conscientiousness. So we'll talk a little bit more about diversity in one more lecture coming up. But overall, having a wide range of conscientiousness in a team is also bad. So overall, if you can identify people who have those team skills, that will probably be aligned with the personality qualities of conscientiousness, and those should elevate. We want high average levels of that and low diversity, and no one with a very low level in the team to have highest team performance. Okay, so one final just little kind of interesting tidbit to think about with respect to team member characteristics. One other deep level characteristic that people tend to vary on is values. There's a whole wide range of values that can be out there. We'll talk more about values when it comes to cultural values in week 3 to think about multicultural teams and global teams in that kind of global context. But one thing that's just important to think about is the idea of congruence or value congruence between team members and what the team is all about. And so this study by Amy Christoph Brown at the University of Iowa, they categorized people as having low, moderate, and high congruence or fit with the team. So people who have low fit, they just don't have a lot in common, particularly with work-related values, kind of what people want out of the team, what people expect and hope to have out of their work. Moderate is good working relationships, don't really sort of feel strongly connected to people, don't feel a sense of similarity, if you will. And high have really strong connectivity in terms of feeling similar to their coworkers. So in this study, what they found was that this fit, people kind of matching the values of the organization or the team in this case, had some really powerful effects. So in particular, if you feel this high level of congruence with your team, you have higher job satisfaction, higher organizational commitment, lower intentional to commit. Teams have higher cohesion, and individual performance in the team is higher. Also, it's important that people fit with or feel connected or congruent with their supervisor or team leader. And they also looked at the organizational level, and there's similar results there as well. But this is the thing to think about here. Now, again, a challenge is you don't have some magical way to detect the values of your team members or figure out who has the same values as you do. So what you can do as a leader is emphasize commonality, identify points of connection, identify the purpose and get people to engage in commitment to the goal and purpose, and identify with the team. So those are activities you can do that actually generate a sense of congruence, even if it wasn't present to start with, to try to create that source or perception. Because in reality, it's the perception that matters. My own research shows this, that perceived similarity is actually more important than distinct or real demographic differences. So if you can have, even if you have a team of people who are very diverse demographically, if you can identify the common purpose and common connections that people have and elevate the perception of fit, you will improve team performance. So very quickly in summary, team characteristics, we want to think about what I presented in the first foundational video with respect to collaboration, readiness, familiarity, prior shared experience. But then we want to be looking for these baseline teamwork KSAs. And then above and beyond that, obviously the expertise to match the problem and purpose of the team. And then to the extent that we can either identify people with personalities to elevate the quality and effectiveness of teamwork, or work with the personalities we have and make sure we highlight and enhance the qualities that will help performance under those particular situations. If we know, for example, we have people who are have low openness to experience, we really have to manage conflict carefully or performance will be harmed, for example. So overall, these should give you some food for thought about what it takes to build an effective team from a composition standpoint. And, I think face the reality that we don't often get a lot of choice with this. So we have to also think about, given who we have, how do we highlight things like similarity, purpose, and fit with the people we have and with the mission of the team, which can also enhance team performance and overall team effectiveness.